Mark Elbashir from CSNWashington.com, and Evan Redmond from SonOfWashington.com. How you guys doing this week?
We're doing tremendous.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to be here. We're going to bring you behind-the-scenes access from all that's going on at the park this week, and we're going to start off with, of course, the big storyline every week, that is Robert Griffin III. You know, after week one, the operative word was rust. Then after week two, it was that we came out flat. Going into week three, we're talking about getting a spark. So what is that? What exactly does that mean? What is that going to look like, Tarek?
You know, I think if you read between the lines, what Mike Shanahan has been saying for the past few days is he's kind of saying that this offense is going to get back to what it was last year. It's just going to take some time. And he hasn't really come out and said it, but it's because of RG3 and his knee. I mean, it takes time for a guy to get comfortable coming off of a major knee surgery like that. I talked about this the other day on Comcast Sportsnet. Peterson set the bar for coming back from ACL surgery. He didn't have his first 100-yard game until week 4. And he didn't really go nuts until week 7. That's when he started racking up the 150-yard. It takes time. And so that's why he's not running the zone read right now. I mean, I know they're going to use the excuse of, well, we're behind. But they used it last year when they were behind, and it opened things up for them. He's just not ready to do it, and they don't want to admit that. And you can kind of understand why.
This is a preseason for nobody, but this is a growth curve for everybody. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is there is a process involved here. Alfred yesterday admitted, hey, you know what? I didn't play as much during the preseason. I felt the difference. You know, some guys feel it, some guys don't feel it. You kind of, it's tough to get a gauge. I think, you know, you could make the argument that London has felt it maybe a little bit, others. But the bottom line is with Robert, I don't know why anybody expected him to come out and be what Robert was last year before Haloti Ngata shredded his knee on December the 9th. I don't know why we were expecting that. What I was expecting was a more passer-friendly quarterback, not necessarily by design, but because I thought that would be the greatest growth, if you will, from year 1 to year 2, and I still believe that. And I think even when he's healthy, and fully ready, you'll still see that, but you'll see some of the old offense sprinkled in.
You know, I think, though, that people expected to see the old Robert because he said he would be the old Robert. And, you know, he basically everything that he has said to this point, he has managed to back up in some way. But an interesting stat for you, through week 2 last year, he had 20 rushes, 124 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Through 2 weeks this year, he has 9 rushes for 25 yards.
You know, I don't want to say that he was maybe not telling the truth about everything, but let's face it, the people who want to criticize him for that don't play in the NFL, and they don't have to protect themselves, not just from the media scrutiny, but obviously from when they're on the field. So he's going to say a lot of things that might not necessarily be 100% accurate, like the fact that, you know, his knee brace isn't bothering him at all. But I think, you know, we talked about the spark that they're going to see. You made a great point about how when they really needed, when they were struggling on offense, they went to the read option, and it seemed like the play that they really liked to run was Robert running the ball out of the read option, and that just isn't there right now. And so, you know, much to my surprise, I was like, you know, the Redskins aren't going to be the same without that. Then Robert Griffin says, you know, I can run, or if they need me to run, I can run.
They need to tamp down expectations instead of building them up like they did all summer.
What Mike Shanahan wanted to do. I think that's what he tried to do at times. It's just that you can't cap expectations when you have Robert out there.
But also at the same time, I think Evan made a great point. You don't want to put it out there that you're going to be kind of a wounded animal, if you will, and that maybe you're a bit of a target. You want to tell the rest of the league, I'm 100%, I can get away from you, just to kind of keep them off balance and wondering a little bit. But I think, you know, one of the first rules of public relations is, you know, keep the expectations low and surprise people.
Here's one of the things that I would say.
Over-deliver.
Yeah. Here's one of the things I would say. If Robert was completely healthy entering in this preseason, do you think he would have run a ton of zone read or a lot of zone read in preseason games? No. If he was completely healthy, right? So why should we look at this as essentially any different? I know the games count, but essentially he's still getting his body right to do everything here. Right. So if you look at these games, the last 2 and maybe even this week, as essentially preseason tune-ups for Robert, even though they count.
Right.
We shouldn't be shocked by this. Plus, then the situation has dictated some of that. I agree with you. They used zone read to come back in games, but they also used a lot of other methods to come back in games. What you can't do is not convert on third down. Robert missed a lot of targets in the first half, but I thought he played much better in the first half in Green Bay in spots than the first half against Philadelphia. Not only were there not the turnovers, or certainly the one that wasn't his fault. You make the argument Josh Morgan has to catch that, maybe Robert threw it. That wasn't Robert's fault. I thought he played a lot better in the first half, even though the production was essentially the same.
I agree.
Let's hear from Robert himself, who talked to the media yesterday.
Robert, you said Sunday's the comments that your guy Pierre Garçon said yesterday about your knee brace and how it's slowing you down.
I mean, like I said, I love Pierre. If he wants to race, I'm more than willing to do that. But it's Pierre's going to be Pierre, and I can't really say anything about what he says. I don't think so, but no.
Robert, how specifically do you feel that you improved from week 1 to week 2? Was there one or two things that you were really happy about that you felt you took a big step forward?
Me personally, just my technique and just doing what Coach and them are asking me to do. I feel like I made strides in that area. And then now it's just about going out and playing. For us as a team, it takes 11 guys to all execute. And we haven't been doing that these first 2 weeks. We got better at it in the second game, but we fell behind the 8 ball again. So we just got to make sure we don't get off to those slow starts, and that's been an emphasis this week, and it'll be an emphasis for the rest of the season.
Later on, talking to the media, he talked about a spark and saying that if he needs to run, he's willing to run, he's going to run. Is that posturing, or are we actually going to see him let loose on the defense?
I do think, getting back to my earlier point, that in the coming weeks, weeks 3, 4, and maybe especially after the bye, you're going to see a more confident, comfortable, sure Robert. He's going to be sure of his knee.
So it may not be Sunday.
You know what? I mean, this is as close to a must-win game as this team is going to face and has faced in a long time. So, you know what? And this is a great stat. I looked this up the other day. Since 1990, when the league expanded to 12 playoff teams, 150 teams have started 0-3. Guess how many have made the playoffs?
Not very many.
3. So, this team has to get the job done against a Lions team that may or may not have Reggie Bush. And even if he does play, he's not at 100%. I think you have to kind of, at this point, throw caution to the wind and say, look, let's give him 7 to 8, zone read looks. Keep that defense off balance, and you got to get this win.
Is there a safe way to run that play? Is there a way in the practice they can say, okay, you know what, we've got to start running this play because that was such a big part of what we did last year. But if X, Y, or Z happens, you've got to get down, or you've got to do something to protect that knee. Can they coach that, you think?
Absolutely, I think you can coach that, and I think that's incumbent upon Robert. That's what this is all about. And we saw Robert run out of bounds, I think, on one scramble or what have you last in Green Bay.
Took a very sharp left-hand turn, more so than last year.
Here's what they need to do. They need to create that deception. We're not only talking about zone read here. We're talking about play-action boots, which they haven't done enough of.
Yeah.
This offense, this passing game is predicated on deception. It doesn't, again, necessarily have to be zone read. And one thing that I keep screaming about is not only play-action boots, but zone read play-action pops, where you operate and sell zone read to the running back. You have no choice. You're not reading to give it to the running back or to take it. You're simply executing the look and passing out of it, which they did twice last week, one to Garçon for a big hitter, and there were so many encouraging signs. I think more of the traditional offense will be back this week. I think you have to do that against Sioux. No doubt about it. But I think what you have to do is get back to what this offense does really well. Deception, deception, deception.
All right, great stuff there, guys. We still have defense, head coach Mike Shanahan, and rookies coming up after this. right, and we are back for segment 2 of This Week at the Park. You guys feeling out there? Got Robert out of the way.
We're done?
Yeah. I mean, we got Robert out of the way. But,
All right.
you know, there are some issues on the other side of the ball as well. You know, the defense has struggled so far, giving up more than 1,000 yards through the first 2 games.
Who's counting?
Exactly. I mean, those are historic numbers we were talking about beforehand. And, you know, there's issues with inexperience, there's issues with execution, there's definitely issues with tackling that Shanahan talked about yesterday. What do they need to do as what are the overarching themes of things that they need to fix for this? Russell, what do you think?
Well, I mean, where do you begin? Even when they got a great pass rush early in that Green Bay game, they did a pretty good job on a 13-play first drive of Green Bay. They held them to a field goal. But even after that, there was some initial success, but once Aaron Rodgers countered with the 3-step drop and spread attack, they could not cover, they could not tackle, they had miscommunication about, you know, there's so many issues here to fix. The biggest thing that I think they're going to have to do, and this sounds crazy against Calvin Johnson and the Lions, is they're going to have to play more of a conservative approach, more cover 2, maybe a little, you'll see a lot of nickel, but less single high safety, where you're really kind of taking away the deep ball looks. And, of course, you know, look, tackling is the biggest thing here. I think we can all agree. Yeah.
30 missed tackles. Josh Wilson
yeah.
missed 6. I believe
Reed Dowdy missed 5, I think.
Bakari Rambo and London Fletcher were next with 4. I mean, it really is becoming an epidemic. I mean, there were a couple of tackles you could not believe guys whiffed on. Yeah. And, you know, I talked to Barry Cofield yesterday in the locker room about this, and he said, look, it's really tough to simulate it in practice because we're in pads once a week, and we're taught not to tackle to the ground. I mean, that's the only way you can do it in the NFL. But he said, you know what we can work on is getting more guys to the ball. Yep. He goes, you know what? James Starks can beat one guy. You know, if Bakari steps up and misses, but if Bakari's the only guy near the ball, he's going to break free for a 25-yard gain. You got to have 2 other players pursuing the ball.
Yes, there really are. And
you got to have some game tackles.
I actually couldn't agree with you more about the conservative approach. I was saying that to a friend of mine yesterday about how they need to kind of I remember the last year I played competitive football. My coaches, it was every single practice where they were like, listen, they're going to catch the ball. You tackle them after they catch the ball. Now, it was so simple, right? You know, you tackle the guy with the ball. But at the same time, the Redskins, you want a mind-blowing stat here. The Redskins gave up, I think I saw this, if I'm saying this right, 283 yards after the catch. 283 yards. That's a pretty good day for throwing the ball. Maybe not in this era, but certainly 283 is not too shabby. So if they can just keep everything in front of them and make every single tackle they can possibly make and kind of do it.
And pray that Reggie Bush doesn't play.
Well, that's the thing. You know, bend but don't break and let them kick field goals.
And the other issue is that you're going up against probably the best wide receiver in the NFL this year and one of the most dynamic running backs. How do you counter that based on what you see?
I actually went back and watched some of the Detroit Arizona game, and after Bush came out of the lineup, it became a lot. I mean, the game completely changed. All of a sudden, the Lions weren't converting third downs. I want to say they didn't get any in the second half. They could double Calvin.
Well, Calvin Johnson admitted that on the teleconference yesterday.
Took him out of the game.
A lot more of the cover, too, right?
They blew a 9-point third quarter lead, and they ended up losing the game, all because Bush was out.
Arizona has a very talented secondary, though. Did the Redskins have the pieces back there to even mimic that game plan?
No, but how you counter that is with a better pass rush and a more sustained pass rush, and that was what was disappointing last. We mentioned it, the pass rush was so good early on between Kerrigan and Arakpo, and I had talked about this coming into the game, that you would see more double fires from the same side, Rack and Kerrigan. We saw a stunt out of one, we saw a traditional one, and they were working against 2 weak tackles. Now, you know, Detroit might not be as bad in that area, so the bottom line is they're going to have to counter whatever Detroit's counter to their pass rush is. If that's a 3-step drop, you know what? You've got to make sure you find a way to get home, whether that's pushing up the middle. Somehow, some way, they have got to get more pressure and sustain hands in the face and just heat on Matthew Stafford to make him uncomfortable, because that's a guy that'll make mistakes. Aaron Rodgers not.
Get creative.
Matthew Stafford will.
Get creative with your corner blitzes. Get creative with your safety blitzes. I want to see more heat coming from the secondary.
And the other thing with Stafford too is that he's not as mobile as the first two guys that they've seen.
Yeah.
Is getting pressure up the middle really one of the keys here? Collapsing the pocket.
I think.
They don't have to sack. They don't have to get.
Right.
They actually had some pretty good sack numbers, and through the season, they have 7 sacks so far, which I think ties them for third. But some of those stats really lie.
Yeah.
Some of those were kind of stringing the quarterback out and watching him run out of bounds. And then, as we saw, Aaron Rodgers was very, very comfortable in the pocket once that early pressure sort of subsided. So they could actually have an excellent pass rush game with getting 0 sacks. They could just constantly
get Barry Cofield to Stephen Bowen.
Yeah.
Just get a little bit of push there.
That's one guy that's got to pick up
lanes.
his game. I mean, I think we all love Bo, but he's got to pick up his game. Yeah. One of the things that concern me, I don't know if you guys picked up on this, a lot of their sacks have come from blown blocking assignments. I mean, like virtually untouched.
Yeah.
So we need more of we need to see more out of this defense of the contested sack or the contested pressures, if you will, where you're tying up multiple offensive linemen and really pushing the pocket and driving your guy all the way back into Stafford's vantage point where he can't step up and he can't move around. If you look at Aaron Rodgers on that 4th and 3, the touchdown to Cobb, he takes a little 3-step drop, but he's got an area to his right where he just can step right up. You can't allow quarterbacks to do that.
That's what I'm talking about. You've got to clog that, and you've got to make sure that that middle area is not 2 yards past the line of scrimmage. It's got to be 3 and 4 and 5 yards.
Agreed.
That's going to be the big difference.
How much are they missing Jarvis Jenkins and Rob Jackson right now?
I think they're missing both a lot from the standpoint of Darryl Tapp has yet to provide what we saw in preseason, and maybe that's not his fault. Brandon Jenkins was only on the field for 1 snap against Philadelphia, more against Green Bay, but made a negative impact on the very first series with the offsides.
Kendrick Golston now has an abdominal strain of some sort.
And you look at Jarvis Jenkins, I mean, what's his strength? Run defense, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, how much, we know they're missing Carricker from a pass rush perspective too, but they're missing Jarvis from a run defense perspective, from an anchoring perspective. Again, doing what the 3-4 defensive line is designed to do. Occupy some blockers, especially a guy like Jarvis, to make it easier for Bowen and Kofi.
And also Jackson was a tremendous guy in coverage last year as well, even when he wasn't supplying a pass.
4 interceptions,
in
right?
the flats,
exactly.
Absolutely. Well, and that's one other thing I hate to keep belaboring. I've seen safeties constantly on this defense jumping flat routes, whether it's by design or whether it's by, hey, we see a guy over there, let's go. Right. I've seen this over and over and over again. I saw it on the James Jones 54-yard pass where he beat David Anderson. Guys are running and covering flat. Well, if you have a guy like Rob Jackson who's really good at dropping out into space, maybe that allows your safeties to be a little more conservative and a little bit more back in the back end instead of having a spread towards the sidelines.
All right, we're going to close out this segment with hearing from head coach Mike Shanahan, and we'll get reaction from the guys coming back in the third segment. Stay tuned.
Mike, Pierre said that Robert would have been better to get some preseason action. It would have helped you all better off to get that. In looking at it, do you think that he's partially right, or is that totally wrong?
I don't know if anybody remembers, but Dr. Andrews said that there's no way he could play during the preseason. Does anybody remember that? We got to go back to this. Dr. Andrews says he could not play during the preseason. There was no chance for him to play.
Alfred said he might be a little bit slow getting going because while he understands why he didn't play a lot in the preseason, some of the same things. Do you think that could have something to do with maybe just some of the guys all together, collectively, maybe not playing as a ton because of the schedule that you guys had and the way you had to go about it?
I'll be honest with you, I thought Alfred was as good as I've seen a running back throughout all of camp, even in the preseason games. Anytime you do have a fumble in the first play, then you have a pitch or on the goal line and there's a safety, guys lose a little bit of confidence. And even starting out the game last week in the first half, you could see he wasn't normal. And I tried to tell him, hey, don't worry about it. You're too good of a runner. And then he started running a little bit better. And, that happens, especially with young guys. We got some conscientious people. They want to play extremely hard. And when they do make a mistake, sometimes they're so conscientious, they lose a little bit of that edge. And I think you'll see Alfred will do a lot of great things this season.
And we'll get a reaction from these guys coming back in segment 3. Remember to stay tuned. All right, welcome back to This Week at the Park. Going into the preseason, we knew that we weren't going to see much of Robert, but it ended up that we didn't really see much of any of the starters. Not a whole lot of guys got snaps. Alfred said it right out of the gate that, not many people had played much since January, and I think that we might be seeing some of the side effects of that now. But you see another guy who really didn't perform at all in off-season training, didn't really play much in training camp, played minimally in the preseason in tight end Jordan Reed, who has exploded out of the gate. He may not be the starter as you predicted last week, Chris Russell. It was
I said don't be surprised.
A wiser prediction than it seemed at the time. And he catches his first touchdown against the Packers, which is the earliest that any receiver for the Redskins has caught a touchdown in their rookie season since Chris Cooley in 2004. No pressure.
Interesting.
But what are you seeing from Jordan Reed that you're not getting from Fred Davis or any of the other veterans?
Well, I think it's what you don't see. And what I mean by that is what they see that we don't get to see, but the people that you talk to around the building, they murmur. And Mike Shanahan and Tarek, you were just kind of alluding to this. Yeah,
it's practice habits. He's making mistakes in practice. Maybe he's not working as hard as he should be in practice.
But I think that's not only just on the field. I think that's also in the meeting rooms, in film study, working with tight end coach Sean McVay. I mean, listen, this is not a bash on Fred, but if you're Fred Davis and you have his past and then you're coming off this injury and you have a 1-year deal, and I think you pointed out he turned down a 2-year deal in Buffalo, you have to look at this year as a big-time motivating, prove it to me, not only to them, but to everybody. You're auditioning for 31 other teams. Right. And if you're Fred Davis, quite honestly, you're letting Jordan Reed and Logan Paulson was already on his level, if not advanced, because of how hard Logan... See, again, this is the thing. And I want to go back to Robert, but this is why people don't understand that this team would not have started Robert if Robert didn't practice well enough to believe that. They base everything on practice and what you do behind the scenes, not just on advertising campaigns and slogans. They base everything on practice. It's why Fred isn't playing as much as Jordan, and it's why Robert started week 1 instead of Kirk. And I'm not saying Kirk was bad. I'm just saying Robert proved to them that he was ready, and Fred hasn't.
But I mean, how big is it that they have a guy in Jordan Reed who is already ready to contribute in this offense? I mean, certainly they took a lot of flack for taking him early when they had other needs.
That was their plan. That was the plan all along. I mean, the minute they took Jordan Reed, I looked around and I was like, you know what? Fred, you probably should have signed in Buffalo because they just drafted your replacement.
Yeah, I made a prediction a few weeks ago that Jordan Reed would be the starting tight end next year and that Fred Davis would not be on the team. I don't know if that's going to happen. I mean, maybe they end up signing him as a backup or whatever. Fred doesn't get the deal that he wants. But I think Jordan Reed is showing everybody why he was drafted so highly and why the Redskins, even though that wasn't a seemingly of a need pick for them, that they went ahead and got him anyway. He's got tremendous size, he's got great speed, and he's been targeted 9 times with 8 catches. That is you don't see that too often. Most guys
That's a Redskins record right now, too. I mean,
I'll tell you this about Jordan Reed. He spent the entire offseason program rehabbing with Robert Griffin III, so they really developed a chemistry and a bond, working off to the side. And you go back to that Eagles game. I want to say at least 3 times he broke off a route because he knew Robert was in trouble, got himself open, and you could see he got away from the linebacker or whoever was on him, and Robert was already looking for him. Robert knew he had half a second to get rid of that ball, and he found Jordan Reed at least 3 times in that situation.
Are we going to see them maximize 4 tight end sets? See 3 tight ends out there? Are we going to see that kind of matchup combination that everyone was licking chops about?
I don't think you're going to see a lot of 3 tight ends. I mean, maybe in goal line, that type of thing, where you can play action out of that, maybe a little boot or just a traditional play action and find one of those guys in the flat while everybody's kind of selling out on the play action and Alfred. But I think you're going to see a lot of what they call the Tiger, the 2 tight end set, but it's going to be a lot of a lot of Jordan Reed and Logan Paulson, because don't forget, Logan's their best blocker, but Logan also proved, hey, look, he might not be the fastest guy, but he has reliable hands for the most part, and Logan is the smartest and hardest working dude in this building.
All right.
Period.
High praise.
Now let's revisit some of our predictions from last week. I mentioned yours that you expected Jordan Reed to start against the Packers. He didn't, but we'll give it to you. That was close enough. Evan, you had that RG3 would have his first 400-yard performance, which was
Pretty close.
pretty close. I mean, he was 80 yards away, and maybe if he had had a little bit more time with the football and a little bit more execution from his receivers, he'd have been in that range, in the 400-yard range. So, going into this week, I need some bold predictions. What do you guys see happening out of this? Tark, we'll let you go first.
I'm going to go with a huge day for Alfred Morris. Somewhere in the range of 200 yards.
Another Cowboys performance.
Yeah, I think he's going to have a very, very big day because the Redskins are going to get back to the offense they ran last year, and they're going to hand him the ball an awful lot. I
mean, he had a career game in certain aspects against the Packers, averaging 8.2 yards per carry. First one with over 30-yard rushes on two carries. So, I mean, that's conceivable. Russell, what do you think?
I see a 17-point effort first half from the Washington Redskins in this game. I see a win to get off the schneid and go 1-2.
Okay,
and I also see 350 plus from Robert against a secondary that, quite honestly, outside of Chris Houston, isn't very good.
All right.
This normally wouldn't qualify as a really bold prediction, but this season it is. The Redskins are going to score a touchdown on their opening drive this game. I think that they are going to figure out something in practice and looking at film that says, okay, we are going. I mean, they might run a trick play. They might do whatever they have to do.
I'd love to see a trick play
on the opening drive. Yeah, and it's just because they've got to. Because if they don't,
is that the spark?
That's the spark. Yeah, opening drive, trick play, go for a touchdown. There you go.
Do teams run flea flickers anymore?
This team doesn't run a lot of flea flickers, but what they do all the time, and what they haven't done enough of, is the wide receiver reverses. Yes. Not necessarily where you're giving it to the wide receiver.
So what are you going to do?
No. But they ran it with other guys too, and it's basically just a decoy and a design to get the defense going. Oh my God, what are they going to do? And they did it several times, many times last year. This year they've done it, but they've done it in a different way where they're running the wide receiver from time. And this happened on Pierre Garçon's big 44-yard catch. Roy Halou lined up at left outside and ran right down a vertical line in front of Robert, but the defense had no idea what they were doing. So they sold something without necessarily doing that.
Yeah. Tark, you mentioned it earlier. Last thoughts before we end this segment. You mentioned that this could be a must-win. Now, certainly the Redskins have dug themselves out of bigger holes before then, being 2 games under 500. But is this a must-win? Can you call a Week 3 game a must-win?
Yeah, absolutely. I thought going into Week 3 the Redskins would be 1-1. I mean, I had penciled in a loss at Lambeau. It's a tough place. It's a tough place to play.
Really
0-2, 1-1. It's not. I mean, but you go 0-3. I told you the number. It's 2.6% of teams dig themselves out of that hole. But you got to look at the big picture. After that, they go to Oakland. There's a good chance you're going to win at Oakland. But then look at the rest of that schedule. I mean, the Bears, the Vikings, the Atlanta. How many 10-win teams? Denver. I mean, they're like 5 10-win teams from last year. Still, they got to play. And I mean, the Giants. They're not playing well, but. They're
always dangerous.
They're always
Any
dangerous.
division game is dangerous.
Cowboys always dangerous. Got the Eagles one more time. I mean, yes, they have to win this game.
You guys agree?
Must win.
Yeah.
No doubt. I mean, you cannot count on even Oakland being an easy win, if you will.
Coming on.
I mean, it starts right here and right now. Lots of teams have done this, so no panic, but they need to win.
Imagine this real quick. They win their next 2 games. They go into the bye and they beat Dallas. They're 3-2 with a victory against Dallas. Mm-hmm. We'll forget about this 0-2 start if that happens.
And everyone feels good. For this week at the Park, for the panel, I am Brian Tinsman. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next week.